From Immersive Labs, this is Cyber Humanity. Hello again, I'm your host Chris Pace. Cyber Humanity is the podcast taking cybersecurity personally, trying to get inside the heads of hackers, as well as putting our feet in the shoes of defenders. These podcasts essentially come in two flavours, either us ranting about themes close to the hearts of security types, or us chatting about threat and security stuff from recent weeks, and this episode is one of those. I'm joined by my crew of the Starship Cyber, Kev Breen, Paul Bentham, and Max Vetter.
Hello.
Hello.
So a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Emotet, which hadn't been in the news for ages, and suddenly now has been in the news like 2 weeks on the bounce. But the headline this week is that security researchers, have secretly been distributing an Emotet vaccine across the world.
Love it.
The company called Binary Defense have identified a bug in the Emotet malware and have been using it to prevent the malware from essentially attacking new victims. This is interesting on many, many levels. I will let Kev talk briefly about like how a vaccine actually works in the context of a threat like Emotet and some of the technicalities of it. And then I actually want to get in a little bit to talking about what does this mean if we extrapolate this out? Like if we did this against every threat, what would the world look like? So, but Kev, tell us about the technicalities of this first. What does this vaccine actually do? How does it work?
So vaccines or cyber vaccines aren't specifically anything new. The concept's been around for a while. They've always just been hard to implement. But what malware authors tend to do is that they don't want malware running rogue on a system. So when you get a user to double click an exe file, or you get it to run, or you've got it setting at auto start for when the computer boots, you want it to run once. You don't want it to spawn itself like hundreds of thousands of times. You don't want it to like keep installing itself over and over again, because that just becomes noisy and difficult to manage and can bring a system down. So what malware authors do is they use a variety of techniques, something called a mutex, which means that only one process can be running at a time, or installation paths that it will check to see whether it's already installed. And if it is installed, then it won't do anything. If it's not installed, then it installs itself. So that's what malware typically does. The concept behind a vaccine is, if I know that when this malware tries to install itself, the first thing it does is check a registry key. If I create that registry key ahead of time, then the malware gets there, runs and goes, oh, I'm already installed, and quits. Or I can inject a mutex into the operating system. So when that malware runs, it goes, let me check to see if I'm already running. It sees a mutex, goes, oh, I must already be running, and shuts itself down. So that's kind of the idea behind a vaccine. Emo crash, as this one is called, takes that a step further. And what the researcher found was that when it installs itself, it does a registry key check and reads a value. And they were able to modify that value so the malware actively crashed. So it didn't stop, it didn't not install itself, it just like completely died on its heels. And the nice thing about that, in the way that it died, is it generated an event log. So you could put emo crash on your system. If Emotet tries to be installed, then it generated a log, so you could actually see whether it was being installed or not, as well as preventing it from happening. All very clever stuff.
The cool thing about this, after they developed this email crash thing, is that they didn't want to like out on the internet, like, hey, we found this thing. So they distributed it through the National Computer Emergency Response Teams, or the CERTs, didn't they? And then they only sent it to their trusted network. So this has been happening for a while now. And I guess, Emotet accidentally patched it or fixed it by changing their persistent mechanism, didn't they?
Yeah, they actually patched it out twice. So the first round, they changed the installation method, but because they wanted the ability to, they basically put backward compatibility into their malware, which meant that Emo Crash still worked even though they changed the installation. And then a month or so later, they removed that backward compatibility, and then it was done.
Changing a malware, or changing how it reacts to a malware, like what if that crashed the machine? Wouldn't that then be a breach of the Community Misuse Act of what the guys in binary analysis doing?
Well, you've got to remember that this isn't that they're not going around to systems and infecting it themselves with the fix. They're saying this is a fix. If you want to install it, you can. It's not like they were going rogue and like shipping this around the world without operators knowing. It was they put together a package. They sent that around and said, if you want to use this, you can. That's why this thing was quite good, because they did all that safety checks. They made sure that it was. It only affected that running binary. It didn't have long-lasting ramifications.
It's pretty lightweight as well, wasn't it? Though it was only putting a key in the registry, so it's like as vaccines go, it was pretty like benign.
Yeah, it's very low risk, and like I said, they weren't doing this like to organisations. They were just saying like this will protect you. It's like at your risk if you want to try it, but there's very low risk.
I want to go back to something that Paul mentioned where you were talking about the distribution of this thing. So they obviously kept it on the down low. It wasn't published in any way. It wasn't shared around. And then it was shared through the certs to, like you said, a trusted network or something like that. I'm kind of interested in understanding who forms that trusted network and who decides who's trusted and who's not.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting part of international collaboration around these types of topics. So each country, most countries have a national CERT, a National Computer Emergency Response Team, whose job it is to protect the nation's critical national infrastructure normally against attacks, and to be the responders for that. You often, in the UK, we had GovCert and Cert UK. They were two separate organisations and merged in 2016 with the establishment of the National Cybersecurity Centre to be the same team to be able to respond to that. They, of course, partner with US CERT and CERT FR and CERT NL and so on and so forth, and they are,
but not CERT RU or CERT CN.
Well, it's interesting. There's some like CERT, the Thai CERT, really like prevalent in the community, and there's this community. It's FIRST, FIRST, because it's the I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but it's the community of incident
responders.
Yeah, and they have annual conferences and tech collaborations and so on and so forth. And these are, because they are employed in the defence, and of course there are lots of it's not just nations, like lots of like there's health certs and so on and so forth. Different sectors have their own computer emergency response teams. In the US, there's ISACs and ISALs and all kinds of different communities that come together to share and collaborate with information. And by forming those networks, those collaboration networks, and sharing information securely, the defenders can collaborate against the attacks they're facing, and hopefully build the kind of strength of the community.
I imagine in the UK, CISP would have been a big part of that.
Yeah, so CISP is the
Cybersecurity Information Sharing.
Spent 3 years selling it.
The NCSC sponsored.
It's not like you want to. It's not like we'd expect you to know anything about it, Paul.
Yes, this was all shared at TLP Green in Trusted Communities.
Ooh, the traffic light protocol, ladies and gentlemen. The most complicated protocol that you can find in information security.
So I still have questions. I understand that there is this thing that we are obviously attempting to ensure that access to intelligence, or in this case, access to a methodology to interfere with malicious code, is not something that should be shared with everyone. But it feels like what we
can't just tweet it, Chris.
No, but it feels like what we just described. And I'm not saying that I'm definitely not saying I have an answer to this, but it feels like what we just described is a kind of a world where if you're in the club, and I'm not trying to be derogatory, I'm honestly not. I'm just trying to understand how this works for the benefit of all defenders, not just those who happen to be part of that network.
Well, but that's exactly the problem, isn't it? A trusted network is only a trusted network if you can trust everybody in that network. As soon as you have somebody that you don't trust, it's no longer a trusted network. Like
it's the circle of trust.
Circle of trust, right? So with CISP, the Cyber Information Security Sharing Partnership.
Paul has now forgotten all about.
I literally wiped that from my mind.
Was it a very traumatic time for you?
I spent 3 years working to build. Oh God! So how that works is you have to have been recommended to. It's a bit like a Masonic course.
Yeah, that's what. Okay, so like I say, I was trying not to be derogatory.
Got
but
it.
The word club does come to mind.
I didn't
We're
call
a
it a
member.
club. Immersive Labs remember that you have to know somebody who's already a member. They have to recommend.
Oh no,
you.
this is more like a golf club. We have to wait for someone to die before.
No. You can have
It's
lots
like a
of
finals club.
You just have to be recommended. You have to know the secret handshake.
Yeah,
And
do you have to
everything's
do any things to?
But it was
qualify?
built up like there's regional organised in the UK anyway. Regional organised cybercrime units. Those are like organised by the police, and their members participate in those in their local community. So if you're a Welsh network security professional working for Admiral or some other company in Wales, you would then be part of that regional unit, and then you would join CISP to share information wider. And it's all about cross-sector information sharing, and it's all coming back to me now.
The one thing I will say to Chris's point, so I was a CISP analyst, I was a CISP member with a defence contractor, I was a CISP member with the MOD, and the amount of information that was shared with me in those organisations is radically different to the amount that people are willing to share with me as Immersive Labs member. So, yes,
It's a bit cliquey, isn't it?
it's very, very
Yeah, that's the
cliquey.
problem, Chris. So there are circles of trust. So there's like 10,000 members of CISP in the UK, but then there is a teeny tiny little groups where the trusted people.
So
go.
there are circles of trust within the
course there are.
circles,
The circles of trust.
But I tell you, it's better than when there was
Micro
a,
dots of trust, one might
yes,
say.
yes. But when there was, I think it was WannaCry. When WannaCry hit, there was lots of different ways of collaboration, and I don't think the US have quite got this. The the National Health ISAC, it had something like 1,000 people on a conference call to share and distribute that information. Now, can you imagine? Like, could you go on mute, please? Somebody's on. Could everybody go on mute, please?
I can hear a crash trolley in the background. Can you go on mute?
And you can't validate anybody on those calls, can you? Like, how would you know that they're trusted?
But when you have circles of trust, doesn't that kind of fly in the face of the whole we are open about vulnerabilities out there and about ways we can actually stop hackers? Like, I thought the whole CVE process and everything
to the guy who came up with Emo Crash's credit, he did try to register the vulnerabilities in Emotet with MITRE.
Yeah, I saw that.
just for jokes, but they didn't let him. Sorry, Max.
I'm really disappointed with that.
But it's the point of why should any certain organisations get access and others not because they're not part of the club?
I've got to say, I disagree. Like defence contractors,
Yeah,
like
you're
CPNI, like I would say that it's more important that they get it and they're allowed to keep it private than Tom's hardware store down the road. His website doesn't. We don't need to protect that with the same level of integrity.
Do you know how you get membership of an ISAC?
Well, I mean, you have to pay, obviously. These companies.
CISP isn't that way, though.
I think critical national infrastructure and everything, yeah, without doubt. But when it then starts to get into, oh, well, you're a member or not of some organisation or not, it seems a bit strange that if you don't pay, you don't. You know, that doesn't work in when all other cyber threat intel, like a lot of it is freely available. You know.
Well, it's not like a lot of cyber threat companies sell you their threat feeds. And there's a really interesting white paper that came out that shows there was only 4% crossover between all of those things that you pay for. So all of these high fidelity threat intel feeds, they took 4 of them, and there was only 4% of identical data between them.
When they all in on that then, because that means you have to buy them all.
Well, so that shows you just how open it's not.
Allegedly.
No, they're not allegedly.
They did the research.
But like CISP, you don't have to pay for CISP. It's just very much a like old boys club. You have to know somebody in there to be able to get invited to get that level of sharing. And they do.
You're not making it better calling it old boys club.
No, but like I said, like, sometimes you have to protect. Like, I don't disagree with what they did. Like, they protected national infrastructure. They protected some very important parts of infrastructure by sharing this information. And had they gone with it sooner, then it wouldn't have had the same level of impact. So Not with everything, but with stuff like this, I'm all for limited sharing.
I think you're right. It's better to have those things run on a national level, on a governmental level, as long as it's organised properly. Which leads us neatly onto another bit of news, well, kind of news, a white paper that came out of Australia last week, where they were suggesting that in terms of critical national infrastructure, where there were businesses under attack in Australia, and obviously this is in light of a lot of recent events, we've talked about it in previous episodes, that the Australian government was looking to run cyber response for those businesses. So what I had kind of described as almost like a cyber martial law, if you like, or a cyber state of emergency, where the government would intervene in order to respond with those organisations being attacked, especially where national critical infrastructure was involved. I just wonder what our feelings are about that.
Great. I don't need to hire a CERT team anymore.
Well, yeah, that's really interesting. That instinct. So, if the nuclear power station at Hinkley Point is under cyber attack, I want Ian Levy from the National Cybersecurity Centre right there on the ground in a helicopter, zipping down a zip wire with his balaclava on. I want him there.
Yeah, it's true. And that's with cyber, we've got used to it being a very private sector corporate thing. Whereas if there were people attacking it physically, you'd call the army, right? Of course you would, or the police force, or someone in the government.
I just imagine he calling the army. Hello, how can I help you? Hi, is that the army? Yeah, it's Max Ritter here. There are mean people outside the Immersive Labs office in Bristol. Could you come and sort them out, please? Thanks.
No, Hinkley Point, not Immersive Labs. I don't think we're important enough. But you would call it in for those attacks like that. So why wouldn't it be more like that with?
Yeah, you get the SAS. You see Ian Levy in the SAS, it'd be brilliant.
Cyber SAS.
So I think the danger there is that if you're one of those organisations and you're going to become reliant on the government stepping in, they're only going to step in when things have got really bad, which means that that's a very reactive thing. So if you
Well, now let me pause you there for a moment, Kev, because looking through the a white paper, I think, is like a sort of suggestion of what could be. So I think it's like a policy sort of suggestion, but it's quite specific. And I'll quote this bit because I think this talks directly to what you're kind of saying. So it says the government should be. First of all, it says that critical infrastructure operators, must not be allowed to hack back, but should be empowered to take necessary preventative and mitigating action against significant threats. So basically, it's saying two things. It's saying that the government could become involved in where it's in the national interest, and then it's saying they would also empower organizations to defend themselves in a forceful way, I think is what it's suggesting.
You know, I'm just imagining here. You know, like when you have a health check of a restaurant and they come in and they shut the restaurant down. Can you imagine? You can imagine the Australian government going in like, "Wow, this is dreadful cybersecurity. We're shutting you down," and they just shut down the company until they fix their cyber hygiene. That'd be great.
I mean, I don't disagree with that either.
You're so interventionist, Kev. I've created these completely surreal versions of the future. Yeah, I'm with that one.
But do we think that? I mean, because the suggestion is in this, this document from the Australian government is suggesting that they want to reach further than that. That is the suggestion.
I think the thing that we've probably not covered explicitly on the podcast, but we've kind of implied it before, is that, of course, national governments with large intelligence capabilities are, of course, supporting these companies.
Interesting on that point. That does then bring us on to the next story as well, because that's another collaboration between private and public sector, which is getting some heat, where the Secret Service had been buying phone data. Data,
Max has found a police story and he wants to shoehorn us over to it.
Shoehorn it. So what happened here is Secret Service was buying location data from a company called Babel, and there are loads of companies that have done that. So this isn't new either, but it's the fact that basically they're getting around doing warrants on people by just buying location data off private companies. Is that okay?
Of course it's okay. The government just bought the data. It's available. There's nothing illegal about that.
It is publicly available.
So just to be clear, if I was a country and there was a certain social media application used by the kids for making videos, and I decided as the government that I wanted to buy that data, that would be perfectly fine to you, Paul, in this context.
I feel like this might be a setup, but let me. I think that data that's for sale, if it's not sanctioned by export controls, should be available.
I'm with you, Paul. If everybody else can use it, why can't the law enforcement?
Government and law enforcement do have a higher standard than private sector, so they can't do certain things with data that private sector can. Because
why?
What do you mean? Why? That's just a fact.
Why?
No, it is actually true. I think the Twitter fire hose back. I don't think you can do this anymore. But back when the Twitter fire hose was there, like literally the T's and C's of the Twitter fire hose usage says it can't be used by law enforcement, like for any purposes. It can't be used by government, but for any purposes.
So there are checks and balances on what a government can do to its citizens with private data, but they seem to have gone around it here just by buying it.
But hang on. But in the Twitter fire hose example I'm talking about, the Twitter terms and conditions explicitly excluded the use of that data by law enforcement. So governments couldn't use it without breaching the terms and conditions of Twitter. So that was one thing.
Do you know that the terms and conditions explicitly said use by, or was it a load of particular uses? So for example, in terms of this location data, the terms of use said that it couldn't be used as evidence in a trial, but there were no other limitations on how that data could be used.
Like, I'm going to get flamed for this statement, but governments don't break the law.
Oh. Oh my! Well, I don't know that you're going to get flamed, but I'm dumb. I might say that I'm dumbstruck.
But here's my point, right? If you look at the T's and C's on a feed, a data feed, you can't breach them. You can't sit there in any context as a government employee, a civil servant, certainly in like Western democracies, let's call it that, and breach that. Like, you can't do that. You can't be illegal and work for the government. That just doesn't work.
Their T's and C's said research only. That's what it says. This is for internal research only.
But then this is where we need a lawyer on the podcast, because define research. I am researching where certain individuals in certain socio-economic or demographic groups are at particular times. That could, to one man, is research, and to another is profiling. So
and surveillance and everything. You know, you can track the amount of locations. So they were using all kinds of apps to gather this location data from. And there is like Senator Ron Wyden has basically, they put a law in place to stop the law enforcement agencies doing this, and they kind of just bypassed it, which is why it's quite interesting that he's chasing it.
Actually, so just to let's take a step back, because it appears to me that what you're saying is a government broke the law.
Well, according to Paul,
they didn't break it. They stepped around. They stepped around it.
It's impossible. They stepped around it. Wow, we
do need a lawyer. Yeah.
If you're not planning on breaking the law, then what's the harm?
The general point about all of these things is that there is the law and then there's the interpretation of the law, and you end up with the shades of grey because of the interpretation. And I don't know the specifics that Max is talking about, but when you buy the data, there's a law that says if you're using location data on US personnel, then you have to go to the intercept court, or what it was called, the FISA court. But I suppose they said, well, we're just buying this data that's available to anybody that buys it. We're not breaching the T's and C's. And so those two things existed simultaneously, and it was simultaneously illegal and not illegal. And somebody, and I would hope this happened, a legal representative employed by the government, FBI or whomever it was, said, yeah, that's fine.
If you thought about chain of custody for that data, and this is again where I think that legislation like GDPR has done a good job of helping people to understand, and organizations to understand how data must be handled carefully. But I think we're headed to a place in a generation from now where people will be so au fait with their own data and how it's used that this will not be allowed to happen.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, the fact is, I should be in control of my data, and there is technical solutions. I mean, this isn't impossible. So I have my data, my profile, which I register, create, and then I grant access to that profile to all these companies.
There is then a question about how comfortable we are with what happens with it. Like, I'm perfectly comfortable for it to go somewhere so someone can market something to me. That's down to, like, I can make free choices about what gets marketed to me. I can't make free choices about a law enforcement organization deciding I was in the wrong place at the wrong time and coming and arresting me.
I think that's what's weird about this story, isn't it? Like, so they can put a FISA section 302, 502, whatever it is, into Facebook, Twitter, Google, etc. And it goes through the FISA court, and they give access to that person's data. That takes too long, so they bought the data set directly from the private company. Now, that private company has got access to that data, and you would hope that the terms and conditions in which that data was obtained was consented to by the people who supplied their data. We do know in the example of Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, where data was given to Cambridge Analytica, a third party within that relationship, which was consented to, and then consent was removed. Yet Cambridge Analytica then continue to use that data set for all its targeted marketing and advertising and so on. And that was where it becomes grey, because you've given your data, it was given legally, that permissions changed. It was a third-party relationship. So I'd consented with Facebook, and Facebook had created this relationship with Cambridge Analytica, and then it all changed. And then you get into these grey areas. So I don't know where this Babel data comes from, but that's
the thing. I consent to give my location data to Google, maybe, but I don't get consent for Google to give that to every law enforcement either. So how can you?
Every SaaS platform in the world is doing this. Like, every SaaS platform in the world is doing this.
I bet they do.
But third parties are probably covered in those terms and conditions that none of us read.
But there's other ones. So that they found Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the IRS are also using other companies for exactly the same. And I know a few years back, the NYPD was using one called Geophedia, I think, and they got caught up with basically Black Lives Matter. They were using it to track people through that, and that was the only time. And they got shut out from it. They couldn't use it anymore because it got out into the public that they were using it for that purpose. So, having that data from private companies is a thing, and I think a lot of people use. Clearly, a lot of organisations using it in the US. It'd be interesting to see if they're using it here as well.
I think what's amazing about this, so you mentioned GDPR, Chris, and I remember all the kind of, oh my God, how are you going to handle business cards when GDPR comes out and all that kind of stuff. And it was pretty worrying, and there was a lot of noise about it. The way that we handle our customers' data today, I can't imagine a situation where we'd have the pre-GDPR even. It's the right thing to do, that we have data processing agreements. We make sure that we know every single system or where our users' data is, and say that when the users want to delete that data or when we're doing an audit, we know where that data is. It kind of blows my mind that there was and this is no longer than 2 years ago, where data could be anywhere. Who cares where the data is? It's just personal data. What does it matter?
To my point, that is why I think in a generation from now, this kind of conversation will be extremely different. So that's the day we can all look forward to. Okay, we are going to wrap up with another Hackers Could, if you guys need reminding of what this feature is. It's basically where we ask every story that starts with the words Hackers Could. I ask my esteemed colleagues whether hackers would, or hackers might, or hackers probably won't. So we've got a couple of good ones this week. The first one is, I don't know how many of you have got that thing in your car where if you're driving down the M4 and you start to drop off, it lets you know if you're straying out of your lane. It buzzes at you. In fact, my car takes you back in, which is really unnerving. The car kind of takes over. But according to a headline, and I will read the headline in the appropriate voice. Hackers could hijack lane-keeping systems to control your car, experts warn. So, Kev, over to you. Hackers could, hackers might, hackers probably won't.
Hackers probably don't care.
What are they going to do? Like drive you to the nearest?
They're going to keep you in
motorway
your lane.
services
It's
or-
brilliant to keep you in your lane, left a bit, right a bit. It's
I
like
mean,
keep you out your
auto
lane.
driving.
The interesting thing is, so it, like to your point, Chris, some of the more advanced features will actually pull you back into the lane. So if you're straying over, it'll pull you back in. Now, hypothetically speaking, if I could take control of that system and those sensors, I could drive you all the way from the outside lane to the inside lane and into the...
All the way from the outside lane to the inside lane.
Or I could take you from the inside all the way to the outside into the central reservation and through. Like I could just drift you across.
okay.
However,
That sounds
you
worse.
can
That's
just
not so
pull
good.
the left hand down and
Yeah,
just...
I could just turn the other way. Yeah.
And what would be the motivation? You know, surely they want to drive them to a cash point, and there's hackers there saying, "Get the money."
No, have you not seen the Fast and the Furious where they drive 3,000 cars out of the third story car park and have them chasing them on autopilot
I
around the
have not
city?
seen that.
That's exactly what the hackers do. It's a brilliant
I skipped out
clip.
at Fast and the Furious 6, I think.
I can't remember which one it was, but it was amazing. All of these Toyotas just suddenly springing to life with no keys, no ignitions, driving out of a car park and chasing them en masse around the
So
streets
this is
of the
what's
city.
going to happen.
That's what's going to happen. That's what this is.
Yeah.
That's what this.
I'm
alludes
still
to.
a bit confused about how they actually. I'm assuming that because it's a car and not all cars are connected to the internet, like fundamentally. I'm assuming you have to plug something into the car.
But the
right?
exploit vector they're speculating here, it's quite fun, this article, because it just makes stuff up, but I like it. So hackers could exploit the smart connected device on your phone, which I have for my car. So like you got a little app on your phone that can like turn it on and off and open the windows and flash the lights and tell if it's run out of petrol and tell you where it is, that kind of thing. Because that doesn't encrypt communications, which is kind of irrelevant anyway, but it gets onto that, and then magic happens and they get from your phone into your car, and now the hackers are in your car, and of course your car's connected to the internet, and now hackers could make the steering wheel. They could park mine for me. It'd probably be better at it than I am actually, and do the parallel parking thing, and that'd be great.
Our car parks itself, and neither of us want to use it because we refuse to trust it to park for us. Isn't that bad?
I've used it twice. It's terrifying. It was terrifying both times.
I used it once, and I thought it had crashed, but actually it just put the brakes on.
It doesn't even. It's not even scientists have found, is it? This one. It's not like they're.
It's essentially an article that says things that
Things
are
have
technology
computers,
could
can
be
be
hacked. Okay, so hackers probably won't then. Let's move on to our last one. Our last one is to do with spiky. It's a brand name, Spiky House Keys, and I'll read the headline. Hackers can now clone your keys just by listening to them with a smartphone. Seems legit.
Great.
Yeah.
Seems legit.
I love this. So they've worked out that with your smartphone, if you're walking past someone opening their own door, the sound that the key makes as it goes
this
into
is like
the
the
lock.
lamp phone thing all
Yeah.
over again.
It's, as the key goes in, they can tell the different sounds of each of the Yale lock. Kind of, there's 5 pins in there, and the different sounds it makes. Then they can extrapolate that into the key, and then you can clone the key and then get into someone's house.
Wow.
Smash a window much quicker.
Yeah, I'd like.
Nobody's going to notice a directional mic pointing at your lock as I'm listening to the sound the key makes.
Yeah, I
as it
wonder
goes
if they
in.
did it on a busy street, or they had to do it in.
I also just love the way
In
you
a
guys
quiet
go.
office.
I love the way you guys go. You assume that algorithm that has to listen for the key going in and the noises, that you just assume that algorithm works. Like that. That is like. That's the stretch.
They do have it. They do have a video of it
Oh,
working.
come on.
There was a video of the lamp phone as well.
Is it in a studio?
That was 4 directional mics on a bridge pointing at a swinging light
We
bulb.
thwarted that hack with curtains. So,
Yeah, this one I think you thought it with a dog barking.
Or cough.
yeah,
Just cough,
cough
as
as you put your
keys
key in. Yeah, perfect.
Public service announcement. Everybody should cough whilst putting their keys in their lock.
Apparently, it's relatively easy attack to defeat. Just make sure no one's around you recording you when you put your key in the lock. There you go.
All right. Hackers could use IoT botnets to manipulate energy markets.
Yeah, so this concept has been, I've seen this a couple of times, and this is almost Die Hard fire sale kind of realm we're getting into now. This is the idea that with the number of smart connected devices, like take smart kettles. If everybody in the UK had a smart kettle and you could control them all and instruct them all to turn on.
Everyone. Okay, I'm going to have to stop you. I mean, how many smart devices? Actually, it's quite a good chat for the end of the podcast. How many smart devices do people think they have generally? I reckon I've got about 7 or 8, maybe 9, and most of those are plugged.
What
Yeah,
are you,
I've got
hang
about
on, what
12
are you,
maybe.
hang on, what are you defining as a smart device? Well, what's...
Light
Or something
bulbs,
connected,
switches,
isn't it?
plug sockets.
Google Home.
Okay,
stuff.
like something that does something like not a phone or a you wouldn't count
Yes.
like a Chromecast or a but Google Home, would Google Home count?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, like
yeah,
an
I mean, this-
Alexa. Yeah.
Yeah, like an Alexa. But this is specifically saying that if you could control all those devices at once, they'd cause a spike in electrical consumption. I mean, this is actually a little bit accurate because during the World Cup, the national grid have to make sure they've got enough power in reserve at half time when everybody goes and turn their kettle on to make a cup of tea. It's an actual thing that happens in the real world. They have to account for it. So if you were able to simulate that at a time where they're not prepared for it, you could crash the grid, like hypothetically speaking. It's light bulbs as well. So if you were to turn on every light bulb in...
I really need to make an announcement or a statement about public internet connected kettles. They are the most ridiculous thing because they can't put water in them. Who's going to buy an internet connected kettle to turn it on with your smartphone? What? This is
You can have it
ridiculous.
connected to the main's water.
Yeah, Virgin have released when you have it, you can have it connected to your mains water and we'll give you hot or cold water on demand.
Like a quokka.
Right.
Like a quokka.
Okay, but
a
yeah,
quokka.
wait, but yes, but that isn't an internet connected kettle. That's an instant
Oh
hot
no,
water
it's
tap.
smart
It's
as well.
smart.
It's smart. It's like 350 quid. with
What's the
installation.
point of it? Instant. You have to go to it. I am brandishing a mug right now. You have to go with it with your mug.
You need a remote control mug.
It's a convenience, Paul. You need a smart kettle.
You do not need a smart kettle.
They sell it, therefore you must need it.
The reason why Kev's defending this is because Kev actually owns a smart mug.
I do have a smart mug. It keeps my tea at whatever temperature I set it to.
What does it keep it at, Kev? You know what it keeps it at.
64.3 degrees.
Yeah, there you go.
For 80 minutes on battery power. I'm not sponsored by Ember, but they do make brilliant cups. Ember, if you're listening, I could do with another cup.
How expensive is this Ember self-heating 64.3 degree mug?
100 of Her Majesty's finest.
You paid £100 for a smart mug just to get your tea at 64.3. Just drink
To
it.
keep my tea there. So the number, if you've ever taken a mouthful of cold tea, you will appreciate my
Don't
pain.
let it go cold.
This is officially a tangent. Researchers said it would take as few as 50,000 infected devices to pull off an attack.
Yeah, but how many people actually have these kettles or will ever have internet connected kettles?
Well, there you have it. Compelling and rich. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do subscribe, rate, and comment wherever you get your audio content. And if you want to know more about Immersive Labs, you can find us at immersivelabs.com or follow us on Twitter at Immersive Labs UK. Until next time, from all of us, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.